5, 6. Okay. Brew. I'm Sarah Alvarez with the State of Opportunity Project at Michigan Radio, and in the time it takes me to brew this coffee, we're going to talk about resilience. We're going to talk about whether or not resilience is a myth, because resilience gets thrown around in a lot of stories about poverty as something positive that comes out of the experience of growing up in poverty or having to deal with all the systems and the sometimes indignities that go along with being in poverty. So, of course, sometimes, yes, it is resilient building to go through tough things and know that you can get through it on the other side. But when you're a child growing up in poverty, there is a lot of trauma associated with things that happen in systems, and there's trauma associated with the instability that poverty often brings. And that can make being resilient very difficult. So unless you have a very stable foundation, which doesn't have to mean money, but means having a very stable attachment to your caregiver, feeling safe, feeling supported, particularly when you are growing up in poverty, if you don't have that foundation, you will not necessarily build resilience on the other side. What you will have is a lot of trauma, and you'll come out on the other side with a lot of trauma. That's not to say that growing up in poverty always is a soul-crushing, horrible experience, that there's no dignity to it. Of course there is, but maybe it's time to re-examine this talk about resilience, and that being the only positive thing, or maybe that being an antidote to a lot of the indignities that people in poverty are forced to go through as a result of their situation. I think I got off topic. So resilience is, of course, different for adults and for children. Going through a tough situation when you're an adult and learning that you can move through that and that you maybe gain some character as a result of it is one thing. When you're a child, going through a lot of very tough situations can actually lead to very significant trauma. And unless you are well prepared to deal with that trauma because you've been Alright, I think there's a difference between dignity and resilience, and there can be everybody who lives in poverty can have dignity, but not everybody who lives in poverty is going to be more resilient because of that, or because they went through that. So when we do stories about poverty, I think it's important to always make sure that people keep their dignity in those stories, even if they're living in poverty. But I don't think we always need to talk about resilience as something that necessarily comes out of that situation. Next question?